Today on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined by Nick Farabaugh of SteelersNow.com. We'll talk about Teryl Austin, what kind of a job he did as defensive coordinator. Should he be back? What changes should be made on the defense, especially in the secondary, and reactions to all the wildness with the NFL playoffs. It's going to be a fun Monday episode. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. As I said before, we're joined by the man himself, Nick Farabaugh. He's back on this show and wearing a Locked On hat, mind you. He's here, he's there, he's everywhere. He's on SteelersNow.com. Read all his work with Alan Saunders there. He does a great job. We've had him on the show before. Nick, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, Chris, and thanks for having me on. Been a minute. It's been a few months, but I'm back and I'm ready to talk about some Steelers offseason stuff. Those mills have been whirling big time, man.
they have been whirling. Well, everyone's going to be talking about the offensive coordinator, and we will do more talking about that on this show. We did a lot last week. I want to stop to talk about the defensive coordinator because that is Teryl Austin, and as I understand it, his contract is up this year. So technically, the Steelers don't even have to fire him. They could just say, we're moving on and go with a new defensive coordinator next year. But this is a defensive coordinator in Teryl Austin who finished with the 6th best scoring defense in the NFL. Now, it ranked 21st in yards. It ranked 8th in turnovers forced, 17th against passing in total passing yards, 19th against the run in total. So not like a super elite defense, but with a unit that dealt with a lot of injuries, never had a truly dominant defensive line. I thought that there were some good things that Teryl Austin did. It's also the second straight year that the Steelers defense has finished top 10 in scoring defense. Should the Steelers bring back Teryl Austin, Nick?
Tough question because it's a decent defense, not an elite defense, and they have elite talent. So you feel like they should be better. And Teryl Austin's other stops in the league have given him stops where he's had good defenses. He's even had great defenses, but he's never been a consistently great D coordinator. So I think we have enough of a sample size to know Teryl Austin's pretty about league average in terms of defensive coordinator talent and kind of what he does. And to me, there's 3 arguments that I can kind of take here. It's one, they can upgrade on him, right? There are good defensive coordinator candidates out there like Wink Martindale and Ryan Nielsen and all these other guys that you kind of look at. But 2, he's done a really good job at doing the most important thing, which has been keeping points off the scoreboard. Like that was a big thing. And they did survive through those linebacker injuries, through the safety injuries, and did enough throughout most of the year. But there's the third part, which to me is I haven't loved the personnel deployment on this defense. Keanu Benton didn't play enough in sub packages. Larry Ogunjobi, who's a hot and cold pass rusher, played 50 snaps. I understand that he had to play more because Cam Hayward was banged up, but I feel like more of the snaps should have gone to Keanu Benton probably sooner. Just different things, how Minkah Fitzpatrick was used throughout the season. Running TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith in the ground by forcing them to play 95% of the snaps when you have Nick Herbig and Marcus Golden on the bench. Just take them off for a few more snaps, make them fresh for the end of the game. And they did that at times. And I thought it really showed how effective the defense could be. So I really think, the schematics of the defense are actually pretty solid. I think at least in the secondary. I think at the front level, in the front 7, I thought they missed Brian Flores. I didn't think they dialed up enough blitz concepts and kind of blitz pressures, creepers, sim pressures, just different things to get open. I thought when they did it, because they did do it against the Bills, I didn't think it was all that great. So what I think they could do is, one, if they're going to keep Teryl Austin, bring in that senior defensive assistant that specializes in the front 7 that can bring some blitz packages and kind of complement what he does on the back end, because I like what Teryl Austin does on the back end, and that's a big part of why they are such a great red zone defense. So I think there's a lot of pros and cons to Teryl Austin kind of as a defensive coordinator, but he has weaknesses. But I think a senior defensive assistant that specializes in that front seven, those blitz concepts, actually could really help him.
I agree. That's something that the Steelers didn't do enough of. And that's another way how you ease off having to run TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith into the ground as far as overusing them. Here's another factor here. And this isn't even about Teryl Austin's talent. And you and I talked about this just briefly off camera. A big factor into this will be the Steelers need to make a lot of offensive changes. There's going to be a new offensive coordinator. I expect you might see an offensive line coach change, wide receiver coach, maybe tight ends, quarterback coach. The one who might keep his job is Eddie Faulkner because of his rep with the team and how the solid jobs he's done. Maybe all those changes don't happen, but you're making at least multiple changes on the offensive side of the ball. To do that and then also get a defensive coordinator is a lot for one offseason, especially, again, when your defense has at least been top 10 for the last two seasons as far as allowing points. That's where I think it's tough to say that Teryl Austin is definitely out the door. But I do agree with you. There are schematic questions that I have about this defense, as well as personnel questions. One, that we saw this year, Keanu Benton needed to be on the field more. I thought he was a big factor when he was on the field. You wanted to get him more tread this year just to kind of get him used to the NFL. But two, we said this. I said this way back in like mid-September, maybe early October. But I said from the jump, Minkah Fitzpatrick's not creating enough turnovers, and that's a problem. The Steelers needed to find ways to use him, to get him more chances to be out there for turnovers, and he was being used for stuffing the run, and he was used for different things. Those things I think were sometimes interesting schematic additions, but it got your best playmaker in the secondary away from what he does that makes him the best playmaker in the secondary. And I wonder if there were games the Steelers could have been better at if Minkah Fitzpatrick wasn't in those spots. And that has to be something that I think is thought about. I get that Teryl Austin has a lot of disguises, and I think that's what he specializes in is the back end fake coverages that bait people into certain things. The interception he got Jake Browning to throw in the first and really the second game, he did it both times to him. But I'm just not sure if it's worth what you're seeing from Minkah Fitzpatrick.
Well, I think that's where the overlap of secondary kind of background, like Mike Tomlin's a secondary background guy too. So I just think you need a senior defensive assistant to bring that front. Like that's why Keith Butler, even when he had his struggles on the back end, his blitzes were filthy, right? I mean, that was a big thing of his. And they had a really good blitz package last year with Brian Flores, but a lot of that went out the window. Now, as you pertain to Minkah, I think as much as Teryl Austin wanted to put him in the free safety spot, I don't think he could. I think a lot of it was personnel related. I don't think they trusted some of their strong safety talent. I don't think they trusted the slot corner talent. They didn't really have a rundown nickel. So Minkah became the rundown nickel because they released Arthur Mollett, never really found a replacement for Mollett on the roster. So it became Minkah. And that's where Minkah kind of got taken. He was a Sam linebacker, a strong safety, and slot corner. That's where he can't be next year. That's not where he should be. But I wonder if they put him there because they thought the limitations of a Shannon Sullivan, KZ, Neal rotation weren't going to make up for what they were going to have. And they feel like they could have put KZ back at free safety fine enough, right? KZ's not a great free safety, but he's also not going to burn you completely back there. And they thought Minkah would give them more splash at the line of scrimmage. That never really came. So I wonder how much of their personnel limitations kind of came into that decision. But 100%, I'm with you. They need to put Minkah Fitzpatrick back in that robber role, that free safety role that we didn't see him enough in this year. Part of it's personnel, I think that is, but I also think it's Teryl Austin kind of overthinking it a little bit. But that's kind of what you look at. Lack of blitz concepts this year, lack of kind of in-depth blitz concepts from the slot. They didn't blitz the slot a lot this year. They didn't really do a lot of blitzing from that position. And I think some of it was personnel related. Some of it was confidence related. But I also think that Teryl Austin needs someone to kind of mesh with him to help that while also getting better personnel in the secondary.
I think a person who could help with that maybe is Denzel Martin, the outside linebackers coach, who does a heck of a job with those guys, and maybe working with Aaron Curry more. I think he did a really good job with the inside linebackers. We'll talk more about what needs to happen on defense, including an article that Nick wrote for SteelersNow.com about Patrick Peterson, because I thought Patrick Peterson helped the defense when he switched to safety, but is that a good permanent role for him in the Steelers defense? We'll talk about that and more here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Nick Farabaugh, stick with us. We got a lot to talk about. But first, I want to remind you that this show is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs is the place that you need to go to when you're looking for new hires to your business. Small businesses need to make the right hires as they're building up their business, and they need to be tapping into more than just their personal network. That's why you right now can go to LinkedIn, create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs, and you'll reach not only to your network, but to the network beyond and to the world's largest professional network, over 810 million people on LinkedIn. Then all you have to do is add your job and add the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so your network can help you find the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. You know, every week, nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter, Nick Farabaugh, breaking down Steelers defensive talk of what they need to do moving forward. Whether or not they keep Teryl Austin, this team does have Patrick Peterson under contract for one more season. This upcoming year, he is a $9.7 million cap hit, and that is a lot of money to be paying a guy if he's not going to be a big player for your defense. I think Patrick Peterson was a reliable asset to the Steelers, not just for what he did on the field, but because he was a good mentor for Joey Porter Jr. I think he did a lot to help him and help his progress into the league. But I also think Joey Porter Jr. has kind of I think he's ready. He's ready to fly. He does. It can help to have another mentor on the team, but I think that he's fine from here on out. Question I have to you, Nick. When we saw Patrick Peterson move to safety, there were some times I thought he helped hold it down when the Steelers needed absolutely anything from their safety position. With all the injuries, Minkah Fitzpatrick was hurt, KZ was suspended, Neal was hurt, even Trenton Thompson was hurt, and Peterson stepped in. I thought he did a decent job at stepping in. But in that Bills game, there were a lot of points where I thought that he was struggling. He wasn't as he's not a dominant tackler. He's not going to help you. He's not a safety that I think removes Minkah from having to take on the role we were just talking about that removes him from being a robber or a free safety. What should the Steelers do with Patrick Peterson this upcoming season in your mind?
Make him the new Cam Sutton. And by that, I mean earlier Cam Sutton. I'm not talking about mainly outside in Cam Sutton. Make him the slot that can play at safety and be a sub-package specialist. That's what I think he is best at. I thought he was as best as a slot guy that kind of disguised coverages, moved around, because I thought it allowed him to see what was going on. It allowed them to do a lot of different things with his veteran savvy. And I think it didn't expose him as much to those tackling situations. I think that's the big thing with him. He just is not a great tackler. He's willing. He's just not a great tackler.
Yeah.
He never really has been. And so it's really hard to make a guy a full-time safety like that when he's not a great tackler. So what I think you would do is make him that sub-package specialist. Bring him in on coverage downs in the nickel. He can be depth on the outside. Now, he ain't doing that at $9.7 million on the cap hit. That's something that's going to be kind of troublesome with this whole idea, but I think he'd be great with there. So either he's going to have to take a pay cut or you extend him and lower that. So one of those two things happens. I'm not sure which one they're going to go with. That's kind of where I view him as. I also think that a new young corner is going to be coming in this year, right? They're probably going to draft a corner, or maybe they sign one. I guess we'll see. They might sign.
They could do both.
Yeah, I mean, they could do both. They tried to trade for Jalen Johnson, which tells me that they want to add to this room. So I don't know what they're going to do, if they're going to sign Johnson, L'Jarius Sneed, or someone else, or they're going to draft one of those first-round guys that we talk about. But his mentorship role might not have as much of a role for Joey, but it could have for that new guy. And Corey Trice, too. So, I mean, they're Darius Rush, right? Like there are young corners that are going to be in this room. I think he helps that slot room a little bit, though, where I didn't feel like they had a great answer in the slot this year. I think he can help you out there as that versatile chess piece. So, do I want him moving to safety full-time? I don't think so, but I think that's part of the solution. I think you make him that true new Cam Sutton, that sub-package piece that you move around, disguise coverages with, do all these different things with, and then he can be kind of your, depth at outside corner. He's just not super fast anymore, and they
That's
need
the
speed
problem.
in the secondary. Like Patrick Peterson can survive in a secondary with a lot of fast players around him, but when those players were DeMonte Casey, Keanu Neal, Levi Wallace, Shannon Sullivan, I mean, we're not talking about burners here. We're talking about guys that are slower, and I think that has exposed him because they had to play more man to get Joey in his best kind of spots, right? So it's hard to kind of fit these guys in. But I think with more speed, I think Pat actually fits into a secondary really well in that slot kind of versatile role in the nickel.
I agree, because that's the big challenge here is if you put Patrick Peterson in a one-on-one man coverage on the outside, he's in trouble. Unless he's facing like a more physical, slower type of receiver that he could kind of outsmart and kind of do. But if he's dealing with a burner, he needs safety help, and that's a liability. But like you said, his wiles, his experience make him an asset in floating around. He's helpful with disguising coverages and communicating and keeping people on the same page. And I agree that could be an asset when you're talking about a Cam Sutton type, as far as moving forward. But when I look at the situation that the Steelers have right there, when you look at the Steelers and what they're paying Patrick Peterson, a $9.7 million cap hit, they would get about $6.85 million back if they were to let him go. Could you then, with all the other moves that we're expecting, like for example, they're getting rid of Allen Robinson or at least not bringing him back under the $11 million hit that he is, Allen Robinson, Mason Cole, and some other guys there. Could you see that being worth maybe using that money to go get a faster cornerback in free agency that can be a real number 2 with Porter? And then that way, if Trice or Rush develop into a number 3 or another guy, you have that ready to go, because a guy you've told me about that you really like, who should be hitting free agency and is going to the AFC Championship game, L'Jarius Sneed. He could be a guy that a type of cornerback that they pick up and bring into this defense.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. How big do they want to go? I mean, clearly they were willing to go for Jalen Johnson, which tells me they're willing to go big. Like that could be the big signing. It could be a Snead or a Johnson. Now, whether either of those hit free agency because the tag and a contract, those are all different things. But it's still a solid free agency class. Like even below that, like a guy like Ronald Darby had a great year in Baltimore. You can bring that guy in too. And Patrick Peterson at $9.7 million to be a Cam Sutton-like defender. Again, it's just not worth the bang for your buck. Like, it's just not. So you're either going to have to extend him because he says he wants to play 15 years in the NFL. So theoretically, that's 2 more years. So you could spread that out, or you're going to have to ask him to take a pay cut. I don't know what Pat's willingness to do that is, but it's something I would ask him to do because they really need that cap flexibility this year. They're going to rebuild the secondary. I think we're going to see a pretty new safety room come in. Again, I don't expect DeMonte Casey or Keanu Neal back personally. I don't. I think Eric Rowe will come back, though. I do think they will bring him back. I think Trenton Thompson will have a role there, but I think they're going to sign someone, and it's a good safety free agency class to make that move. And those guys don't come super expensive, so you should be able to make a move there relatively cheap against the cap for this year. So if they want to make a big splash, if they want to go get a L'Jarius Sneed or a Jalen Johnson, I think absolutely you have to consider at least the idea of moving on from Patrick Peterson. I think you have to. Again, 9.7 is a really hefty cap hit for a guy that could be that slot guy. And I just don't think it's a feasible option to go into next year putting him in there at outside corner as your starter opposite of Joey Porter Jr. I think you have to upgrade that spot.
If the Steelers defense were to make one aggressive move outside of an outside cornerback, what would be the other move that you would make?
Yeah, tough one. Probably offensive line. Maybe there's a tackle.
I mean, on the defensive side of the ball.
On the defensive side of the ball,
yeah,
I'd go get another impact D lineman. I would beef up that interior D line because I also don't know what they're going to do with Larry Ogunjobi. I think that's a tough call.
That's a tough call.
That's a tough call. But if it's Benton Cam on an extension because his cap hits monstrous last.
Yeah, it's 22.4 right now.
They're gonna get that down with an extension. I'm assuming. By the way, all that cut talk for Cam is not happening. It's
no, of course not. No, that never was in play.
I think it's a formality. They're going to extend him, but I think D line. I think that's where it makes the most sense to me. Look at the D linemen that are going to be out there this year. There's a number of guys that are significant contributors, and they're not going to have the draft capital to draft every single defensive need. I think what they're going to do this year, and this is kind of my prediction, is free agency is going to be focused on filling the defensive side of the ball up with kind of vets, make that as good as they can for next year. And then they'll draft maybe, the center and the tackle. We'll see. But I expect defense to be heavily focused there. And if it's not corner, I think it should be a defensive lineman. I think interior defensive lineman would make a big difference if they're moving on from Larry, even if they keep Larry. I think another great defensive tackle would be a huge boon to them.
It certainly is. The Steelers' defensive front was not the dominant version that we've seen in recent years, where we've seen them take over games, take away the run, also include themselves in the pass rush more. Larry Ogunjobi, I thought he was solid, but like to your point here, Larry Ogunjobi next year is a $13.2 million cap hit. That is a lot of money for the kind of production that he brought. Cutting him, they'd be in a tough spot because he'd be owed about $7 million in dead cap. So they only get about $6.2 million back in cap space. But again, you add that up with what you do with Peterson and Robinson and Chukwuekorfor and Mason Cole. And then you start to build up some capital that you can use to make one or two splashes with in free agency to revamp that side, get a few other positions, and then put yourself so that you only need maybe 2 or 3 solid additions in the NFL draft.
I mean, let's just think about a big fish they could land at D-line. Christian Wilkins. That could be
that's a big fish.
That would be a big fish, right? But that's who they could go if they don't want to go that big. But a guy that's been really solid for most of his career, a Daquan Jones, who has played really well in Buffalo. Someone that can bring them really good depth. I think that's the other big fish move that I can see them paying out for. And so corner, safety, we'll see what happens with linebacker. I assume that's going to come cheap. And then I think D-line is the sleeper kind of area where they could really make a big splash, insulate themselves against a potential fall off for Cam Hayward, while also boosting it where if Cam Hayward regains his form, they're going to have one of the best fronts in football.
Exactly. I think that's where if you get that back next year, that changes a lot about your defense. You're stronger against the run. You're also getting after the quarterback better again. And then if you're increasing the rotation of guys like Herbig and Golden with Highsmith and Watt, that becomes a very dangerous defensive front. And then, again, off-ball linebacker, they do it safety. That could change up a lot of what this defense likes to do. So many things to change there, or so many things to watch there that the Steelers can do to improve the defensive side of the ball. I wanted to talk defense because we talked a lot of offense last week, but we also got to talk about what happened in the playoffs this weekend. Some big results, and we now know the conference championship games. We'll talk about that and our reaction to them, and just how far away the Steelers are with competing with some of these teams that were in these games. That and more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. The NFL playoffs are here, and you too can win big with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets back with any winning $5 money line bet. That's right, $150 just in your for bonus bets if you pick the right team to win on a $5 money line bet. It's an app that's super easy to use, and there's so many different ways to win bets, like live same game parlays. You can do it in the middle of games if you're feeling something develop. You can find bets with a new Explore tab in the app that allows you to look up all the different bets that you can make. You can make a parlay in what's called the Parlay Hub, where you can hunt the different things to put together your next eight-legger. I was this close. I had 7 legs this weekend. If Deebo Samuel doesn't get hurt, I would have had one. But there's so many ways to win with FanDuel Sportsbook and plenty more. The app is super easy to use. You can bet on spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. So get it on right now by visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can make your first bet a layup by going to FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL, and FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter, Nick Farabaugh from SteelersNow.com, talking with you here. Steelers. We're going to step away from the Steelers defensive talk a little bit, and let's talk about what we saw in some of these playoff games. Now, do want to say we've been doing the pigskin bracket challenge that everyone, I believe, participated in for the Locked On Steelers group right now. I think first place is some person with a really long name that just says ESPN fan. They're pretty much up there. I have the Niners beating the Ravens in my bracket, so I'm still doing pretty all right now. But I did think that the Bills were like when I had the Chiefs making it here in my bracket. But when this matchup happened the way it did, I was looking at going into this game. I was like, I think the Bills could take this team, and that's the most recent game. That's the game we just finished watching before we started recording here. Nick, your thoughts on the Bills just not being able to get over the hump, and what was a great game, but man, just down to the wire yet again. And now Patrick Mahomes is 3-0 versus Josh Allen in the playoffs,
and against like the worst team of the Mahomes era.
Yep.
I mean, they got playmakers basically. No, like they have three playmakers. It's Travis Kelce, Rashee Rice, and Isaiah Pacheco. Like,
yeah,
MVS stepped up today, which was kind of really big for them. He made 2 huge catches, honestly. But like, it's not a great offense in terms of the weaponry, but Patrick Mahomes is just that good. And man, the Bills had so many missed opportunities in this game to pull away too. The fake punt was a weird call from Sean McDermott. Allen missed Shakir up the seam. Maybe should have just given it to Diggs on the drag. Like, there were a few things you can look back on. It's just, I don't know what it's going to take for the Bills to get over the hump. The defense, every single time they meet the Chiefs for the second time in the postseason, just fails them. And this time, I think you can attribute it a little bit more to the fact that they basically had 3 linebackers.
Yeah, it was tough.
Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard were both hurt. Tyrell Dodson was hurt. AJ Klein got hurt. Like, it was tough. Like, Tyler Matakevich and Dorian Williams were playing significant snaps out there, but it's tough. They even beefed up their run game. Like, that was what everyone was saying, right?
Yep.
They need a run game. And then they did run the ball. But then the second half, their run game got kind of stone cold. And that was that. Mahomes took over. And of course they figured it out, right? Mahomes is always going to with Andy Reid. And so no matter how many shenanigans Mecole Hardman is going to try and pull.
Oh man, that fumble at the goal line, that was crazy. That's what I thought the Bills were about to make their move, and then they just didn't capitalize. But that's how good the Chiefs are. If you don't strike on them when you have even the slightest advantage, they're going to find a win. The Lions beat the Buccaneers. The Niners edged out the Packers. That was a tight one. And the Ravens blow out the Texans 34-10, even though the Texans came out and gave them a good fight in the first half. You see these teams here, and not even the teams that just won, but also the teams that lost. How far, Nick, are the Steelers from being able to contend with these type of 8 teams? Because they also beat one of these 8 teams, and that was the Packers. They also, actually, they beat the Ravens too. So 2 of these 8 teams.
Yeah, how far are they away? Well, they have superstars defensively that can compete with any of these teams. Watt, Hayward, Minkah can go toe to toe. I do think they're a little bit of a defensive kind of formality away. I think they need to kind of, as we talk, they kind of have to figure out what they're going to do up front. I think what we've seen this postseason is the value of having a creative blitz designer up front between Mike McDonald, Todd Bowles, all these different guys, Steve Spagnuolo, like all these guys are really good blitz designers. So I do think that's something we need to look out for in terms of what you need to do in schematics. But I think the big overarching thing is quarterback play. Like, it is the simplest thing. The Steelers, I'm not going to say they are just necessarily a quarterback away. I think that they have holes at center, left tackle. I think that's obvious that they have to fill those. They need a wide receiver 3. Like, they have holes. We talked about the secondary. Like, they have issues. But I'll tell you who else has a lot of issues on their team that still played really well. The Packers. Like, the Packers, that's not like, the defense has needs on that team. Significant needs, and they came out and played really well. Their weaponry really came along and became explosive. But the Steelers, as we saw late in the season between Pickens, Deontay, Freiermuth, Najee, and Jalen, can be explosive and very, very hard to stop too. So if you put Jared Goff on the Steelers, you put those guys on the Steelers, you put a legitimate quarterback on this team, I mean, they're not that far off. Like, that's what I will say. That is the biggest piece of the puzzle. Offensive coordinator and quarterback. Those 2 things. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Those are the 2 biggest things the Steelers are missing right now.
I'm with you on this. I think that the thing is that they need other things. They need a center. They need an offensive tackle. Like they need to not be living with Mason Cole and Dan Moore Jr. next year. And if they can get really good at one, they can, especially center. I think they can kind of live with Dan Moore as long as Broderick Jones moves to the left and plays there. That's another story for another day. But if the quarterback play was consistently above average, not elite, not top 10, just like middle of the league, slightly above, giving you solid play, avoiding turnovers, making the occasional good pass, keep letting the Steelers playmakers do what they do. A good game manager, like you said, Jared Goff, a great comparison. I think the Steelers team is much more. They don't lose those games to the Patriots, to the Cardinals, to the Colts, and you don't lose those games. All of a sudden, you're going into that final week against the Ravens in this season, and they're not resting their guys. They're playing their starters because you're going back and forth with them in a race for the 1 seed. And that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that this team has everything figured out and they're so close to winning a Super Bowl, but I do think they could be a contender that bangs with some of these teams. Now, if the Chiefs and the Bills are playing lights out, that's always tough to beat, especially when you have elite quarterback play. But with the way that they're playing, I mean, in the way that they played the Bills in their game, they were a couple turnovers away from being in that game without TJ Watt. That's where I think that this Steelers team does stand a chance if they're able to make the right additions. The question will be, how aggressive is Omar Khan in this offseason? Do they get the right offensive coordinator? Do they go and what do they do at the quarterback position? They got to fix center and left tackle or tackles in general, and they need to make the right pieces on defense. It's why this has to be a busy offseason for the Steelers front office to get things going.
Yeah, and the value of a quarterback and an OC is it can cover up some other flaws too, right? The Lions, even with above average quarterback play, that's secondary. It has its flaws. Like at corner, they are tough. Like it's a tough room to look at corner right now, and we saw that manifest itself later in the game against the Bucs today. Like there are these teams in here that have flaws. Like not all these teams are perfect, as we talked about with the Chiefs. Their wide receiver room is not very good. Right. Like they don't have a great tackle duo either. Like there are issues, but great quarterback play, above average quarterback play, great play calling, good schematics can cover up some of that. So you don't need to be a super team. You don't need to be a perfect team to compete and win playoff games. Now, if we're talking Super Bowl, yeah, you probably need to take another level to that roster building, but they're not so crazy far away. I think there's been an overbit of pessimism kind of throughout the fan base after that loss to Buffalo. Like, guys, this team isn't desolate of talent. Like, their weapons are very good. They have 2 great pass rushers, and it looks like a third one. Keanu Benton is a great young player. They have a great safety, maybe the best in the game. They have a young lockdown corner. Like, there is talent on this football team that I think you look at and you say, there's things to work with here. Like, this is not a completely bare cupboard. Like, it is a very, very raw team in terms of the talent. Like, a lot of these young guys still have room to grow, but it's talented. So they get a good quarterback, just an above average quarterback play, and they get an OC that can get them in the right kind of rhythm, the right scheme. Like, yeah, they can compete with these guys. Like, again, that Texans team, for example, that is not a perfect team. That Texans team has holes over it. But CJ Stroud was unbelievable, and Bobby Sloak knew what he was doing. Like, yeah. And they got to the divisional round. And so, the Steelers can win playoff games with above average quarterback play and a solid OC. That's why the OC hire and what they do at quarterback, it trumps everything this offseason. Of course, they have to fill the other holes too, but quarterback, OC, never forget it. Those 2 things are so huge in this league.
I agree. They're going to be a big talking point moving forward. We got to talk more about the offense at some point this week. We'll get back on it there, but we had to talk some defense and had to get my man Nick Farabaugh back on the show. Nick, thanks so much for joining us. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Chris. As always, you could follow me on Twitter X at FarabaughFB. Make sure to read SteelersNow.com. More coming from me, Alan Saunders, and the team over there.
Absolutely. He's Nick Farabaugh. Thanks so much, Nick, for joining us. I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. Back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.